Welcome back, guys. In today's video, we're going to be covering the concept of naming. So it's important you know the rules for naming different types of compounds, right? So we're going to have a metal plus a non-metal, right? And a non-metal plus another non-metal, right? So these are two different scenarios that follow different rules when you go to name them, right? So once we cover these rules, we're going to do some practice over here. And what we're going to see with these four practice problems is some of them are combining a metal and a non-metal, like in this one, and some of them are going to be combining two non-metals like in this one right here. And we're going to cover that in just a second. So let's jump right in. So in our first scenario, we have a metal coming together with a non-metal, right? So if we have that situation, what we're going to do is we're going to write the name of the metal without changing it, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to add IDE or IDE to the end of the non-metal. Now, one thing that's important to know is where the metals and the non-metals are on the periodic table. You can know this rule, but if you're met with a problem where you're not sure whether it's a metal or a non-metal, you could run into issues on which set of rules to follow. So just as a rule of thumb, on the periodic table, if we're looking for metals, right, the metals are going to be over here on this side of the periodic table, so over here on the left. This is going to include things like sodium, magnesium, calcium, lithium, things of that nature, right? It's going to be over here on the left side of the periodic table. Now, with metals, right, there are the metals over here. Now, they're also on the periodic table are the transition metals, right? The transition metals are going to be in that middle section of the table, right? There are going to be some metalloids, right, which are like the mixture of the metal and the non-metal. There's a couple of them right here. And then lastly, there are the non-metals, which are over on this side of the table. Now, this is a very rough sketch of what the metals and the non-metals look like and where they are on the periodic table. In the description in the video, I'm going to attach a link to a really good periodic table that I use that tells you which particular atom and which particular group on the periodic table belongs to which category, which is the metals and the non-metals, and it even labels the metalloids and the transition metals. So I'll attach a link to that periodic table that I use in the description of the video. But for this video, we can get by just using this rough sketch. So if we have a metal and non-metal, we're going to write the name of the metal without touching it, and we're going to add I to the end of the non-metal. Now, what happens if we have two non-metals, right, something over here on the right side of the periodic table coming together? Well, in that case, we're going to have to use the Greek prefixes, right? And I listed them out right here: 1 mono, 2 di, 3 tri, 4 tetra, and so on and so forth, right? Now, we're also going to have to add "ide" to the second non-metal. So basically, there's these two set of rules. Once we pick the situation that we're dealing with, we can follow these rules and get the right answer. So let's jump into our practice problems using these rules and see if we can get the right answers. So our first practice problem is MgCl2. Now, Mg is magnesium. Magnesium is over here on the left side of the table. That's a metal, right? And chlorine, which is Cl, is way over here on this side of the table. That's a non-metal. So in that first practice problem, we're going to be dealing with a metal and a non-metal. So what we're going to do is we're going to write the name of the metal, so magnesium, right? And we're going to write "ide" at the end of the non-metal, right? So instead of this being magnesium chlorine, we're going to make this magnesium chloride. So this is magnesium chloride, right? So if this was NaCl or LiCl, both metals on the table, right? It would be the same thing. It would be sodium chloride or lithium chloride, right? So we don't change the name of that metal. We add "I" to the end of the non-metal, right? Okay. So the second one, we have SO2. So this is sulfur and this is oxygen. Now, sulfur and oxygen are both over here on the right side of the table, making this a combination of two non-metals, right? So in this case, we need to use the prefixes, right? So we're going to have to use these Greek prefixes when we're dealing with this type of situation, and we're going to add "I" to the second non-metal. Okay, so in this scenario, what we're going to do is we're going to call this sulfur, right? Now, mono is the Greek prefix, right, when you have one thing, right? So there's only one S. However, when the thing that comes first has a 1, you don't include the mono. So we're not going to call this monosulfur, right? If the thing that comes second has one thing associated with it, then you would put the mono. But if the first atom, right, which is sulfur in this case, has the 1, you don't call this monosulfur, right? So we're just going to keep it sulfur. Now the second thing, right, this is a nonmetal and nonmetal, right? So we need to use our prefixes. So this is sulfur di, right? There's 2 oxygens. And we're going to use our rule add "ide" to the second nonmetal. So our second nonmetal is right here. This is dioxide. Okay? So it's 2 nonmetals. So we're not going to call this monosulfur dioxide, right? Because that first thing has a 1. And if the first thing has a 1, we don't include the mono, right? So N2O5. So this is nitrogen and oxygen, which again are both nonmetals, right? In this case, we're going to have to use the prefixes, right? Now, our first thing has a 2. Okay, the only time you have to follow that rule where you don't include it is if the first thing has a 1, you don't include the mono. But this is nitrogen with a 2. So this is dinitrogen, okay? And our oxygen has a 5, okay? So that's going to be penta, right? So this is dinitrogen, pentaoxide. Now, when you see pentaoxide, you can write it pentaoxide. A lot of the times you just see it written pentoxide. I think either is fine, but I usually see it written pentoxide, okay? So this is dinitrogen pentoxide, okay? 2 nonmetals, we have to follow that rule. Make sure you add "ide" to the second nonmetal. Okay, our fourth example is Li and F. Li is lithium. Lithium is number 3 on the table. It's over here in the metals section, right? So we're going to be dealing with a metal and a non-metal because fluorine is over here on the table. It's a non-metal. So we're going to follow the rules of keeping the metal the exact same. This is lithium, right? And we're going to add "ide" to the end of the non-metal. So this is lithium fluoride. Okay, make sure to add "ide." Okay, so just as a summary, you have a metal and a non-metal, right? Metals over here, non-metals generally over here, right? Make sure to check out that periodic table. Make sure you can analyze that periodic table and know where these things are, okay? But if you have that situation, keep the name of the metal, add "ide" to the end of the non-metal. Those are these 2. If you have a non-metal and non-metal, use the prefixes, right, and add "ide" to the second non-metal. Just making sure that if that first thing is just 1, right, you don't put the mono, okay? Now, in this one, it was dinitrogen pentoxide. We had 2 nonmetals, and we kept our prefixes. We added "ide" to the end of the second nonmetal. So this is how you name structures using these rules, and make sure you know how to go through and analyze whether it's a metal and a non-metal or 2 nonmetals. Thank you for watching, and make sure to check out more videos on the channel.